Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today, I'd like to talk about making great photos, creating those remarkable photos, and great photography. And so, what have we talked about in some of our previous sessions? We've talked about the exposure triangle, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Aperture is a lens opening, a shutter speed, exposure time, and light sensitivity, that's the ISO, and using those elements to create great pictures. We did touch a little bit on light meter, and we also talked about the rule of thirds and placing our image in one of the key areas as indicated by the dots there in the rule of thirds. And so today we want to touch on, what does it uh, take to create great photos? And in making great photos, it's all about what you see, seeing well. It's not about the camera. The camera is just a tool. It's seeing your story. What story do you want to tell in your photos? And telling it as simple as possible. And who are the main characters? Is it a person, an object, a building, an animal, a bird, flower? And what are some of the supporting elements? Um, Choosing only those important items in your supporting elements and main characters, and giving the characters, the viewers, a sense of place as if they are being there in the middle of the photo. They're looking at it and seeing themselves in the photo. And another element of making great pictures is making sure you're paying attention to the background. One of the worst experiences I had is taking a family photo and then realizing that I had a light pole in the background and it looked like it was coming out of someone's head. So you want to avoid that. And luckily, I was able to fix it in Photoshop and remove the pole from the person's head. But we want to get those great photos in camera so that we don't have to do as much editing in our software programs. And again, those rule of thirds, dividing your frame into points of interest again, and changing your viewpoint to add interest. And I found that sometimes just turning around or moving just a few inches will give a different perspective and a different point of view and add a little bit of interest. And paying attention to the light. But there really is no bad light. And sometimes we can use light to create creative images, a creative aspect to our images. So making great photos is also about those basic photography skills that we talked about. And, keeping the image sharp, making it sharp. And how do we do that? A couple ways we can do that is avoiding camera shake, holding the camera firm against our bodies, arms close to us, and making sure we have the right shutter speed. And if that's not possible, use a tripod. Um, if it's dim light, sometimes you may have to use a tripod. Also, focus mode, and checking your camera to make sure that your focus mode is, you have your preferred focus mode. And then the next basic skill is getting the right exposure. And again, that goes back to the exposure triangle that we talked about. And I will put the link to that session in the comments below. Next, you want to set your camera to the preferred metering mode. So check your manual for that, and also knowing and adjusting the exposure compensation on your camera's dimmer switch. So next, we want to talk about creative exposure options, and what does that mean? This area focuses on your aperture and shutter speed. So isolation apertures are narrow range of focus. That's that large opening. Remember the smaller numbers, f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4 and f5.6, depending on your camera and your lens. If you have a full frame camera and a fast and your lens, some of those apertures will go down to 1.4. If you have a lens that has a 5.6, you may not be able to get down to those large openings, those apertures. The next is your inclusive aperture or your wide range of focus, those small lens openings. Remember, the lower the number, um, the larger the opening. The higher the number, the smaller the opening. That's f16 and f22. Your mid-range apertures, that's going to give you your sharpest aperture, f5.6, f8, and f11. And I usually stay somewhere around f5.6, f6. And I find that that gets me the best and sharpest photos. And some of the creative ways we can use our shutter speed is sometimes you might want motion blur, and that's the slower shutter speeds of 1/4 of a second, a half a second, 1/8 of a second, 1/15th or 1/30th of a second. And for those low shutter speeds, you're probably going to want to use a tripod. Um, if you want to freeze action or someone's running, action photos, that's your faster shutter speeds. 1/25th, 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th or higher. So adjusting your aperture and shutter speeds according to the type of image and the type of photo that you're trying to create. So understanding all those things, your exposure, your aperture, and shutter speed, all those elements go into making remarkable images and remarkable photography. And then the last point I want to touch on is white balance. And you can adjust that in your photo. You can in your camera. And you can use your auto white balance, or you can set it again. Check your manual to see how to adjust your white balance. You know, whether it's a cool color or warm color. So setting your white balance accordingly, adjusting for light. And so these are just a few tips that I wanted to touch on today in creating and making great photos and remarkable photography. And as always, I'd like to thank you for joining me and tuning into my channel. And hope you have a great day and go out and create some remarkable images and remarkable photography. Thanks again. Bye bye.